This world is full of tales of heroes and villains, and while it is ultimately the journey of the hero that the audience connects with, the role of the villain is one that should never be underestimated. A good villain acts as a foil, allowing the hero to shine. I mean, how heroic can a hero really be if there isn't someone creating a situation that warrants such acts of heroism? Over the years, we've witnessed a plethora of antagonists who range from pure evil to others with their own misguided sense of justice. As essential as it is to be able to write a good hero for your story, writing a great villain is an art in and of itself. Anime and manga are home to some of the most iconic villains ever, with the likes of Frieza, Madara Uchiha, Blackbeard, Yagami Light, Dio Brando, and Femto, to name a few, having terrified and captivated fans for generations. Tite Kubo, the creator of Bleach, had already created a villain in Aizen Sosuke who was as iconic as the names we mentioned earlier. It was therefore not a surprise when the latest villain for Bleach turned out to be one for the ages as well. For the final arc of the manga and the ongoing anime 1000 Year Blood War arc, we'd be introduced to Yhwach, a villain so overpowered, enigmatic, and ancient it would require Ichigo to get help from all of his friends and even old foes to deal with him. In this video, we'll be talking about everything related to Yhwach, the Emperor of Wanderreich and the father of all Quincy. So let's dive right into it. What are the motivations and personality of Yhwach, the Quincy Emperor? The sealed king of the Quincy. After 900 years, he shall recover his heartbeat. After 90 years, he shall recover his intellect. After 9 years, he shall recover his power. This was the prophecy that spoke of the return of the Quincy king Yhwach after he was defeated 1,000 years ago prior to the events in the 1000 Year Blood War arc by the Shinigami led by Yamamoto Genryusai, Jigekuni, and his Gotei 13. He's the son of the Soul King, the creator of the Bleach universe as we know it. Through the Soul King's powers, the primordial world was sundered and divided into Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the world of the living, which resulted in the creation of the concepts of life and death. Yhwach believes that this is a flawed system because the creation of life and death gave rise to fear and sadness. His motivation is to create a utopia free from the fear of death, and to that end, he believes he must slay his father and take over his power to unmake what the Soul King has created and return the world to its original state. He also claims that he wishes to end his father's current state of existence, which he considers humiliating, as the Reo is a living corpse acting as the linchpin that holds the three worlds in place after being betrayed by the Shinigami who usurped his powers. His hatred for the Soul Reapers is therefore intense, as he blames them for creating a flawed world full of suffering and the humiliation and betrayal of his father. He's a man full of contradictions. Yhwach claims to pursue true peace as his ultimate goal while not hesitating to wage a brutal war that causes massive casualties on both sides. He also treats Quincy as his children and comrades, treating them fairly, but doesn't hesitate a second to sacrifice them when it suits him. None, including his most powerful and trusted subordinates, are spared when he needs to sacrifice them. What is the origin and history of Yhwach and his conflict with the Shinigami? Yhwach is the son of the Soul King and an unknown female, and the exact time of his birth is unknown. He was born without the ability to see, hear, feel, or even move. Fortunately, the people around him treated Yhwach with great reverence and honor due to his ability to grant anyone who touched him whatever they lacked. He was able to transfer pieces of his soul to these people, which was able to heal their wounds physically, mentally, and spiritually in a way that their own souls could not. These fragments of his soul would return back to him upon their bearer's death. Captivated by this miracle, people continued to flock to him and receive fragments of his soul. As these people perished and the pieces of his soul returned to him, Yhwach began to regain his sensory faculties. Upon recovering his hearing, he became aware that the people who worshipped him were calling him the name of their god, Yhwach, which he decided to take for his own. At some point in history, he discovered the ability to engrave his soul with a letter, which allowed him to share his soul fragments in a much more effective and deeper way. This was the beginning of his conquest and the creation of the Quincy and the Sternritter, along with his empire known as Lichtreich. His empire would span the entire northern region of the living world and would soon threaten even Soul Society. It was then that he would come into contact with Ichibei Hyosube, who would arrive at the Lichtreich to broker a peace treaty between the Quincy and the Shinigami. Yhwach, however, would reject this after the truth about the Soul King and the creation of all things came to light. This would prompt a battle between the two in which his ability, known as the Almighty, would be sealed, but he he would also be able to steal the left arm of the Soul King from Ichibei. Not long after, he would bring war to Soul Society, where he would fight with a young captain, Commander Yamamoto Genryusai, and the first members of the Gotei 13. There, he would face defeat and a total extermination of his invading forces. It's after this that he's believed to have been sealed, and the prophecy that we mentioned earlier would come into existence. 1,000 years after his defeat, this prophecy would come to pass, and he would begin regaining his abilities, and during the final 9 years, he would use an ability called the Oshvalin to retrieve his soul fragments and powers from all the Quincy he considered impure, unworthy, or weak in order to finally begin his return to full power. This event 9 years ago would cause the death of Ichigo Kurosaki's mother, Masaki Kurosaki, who got hit by the Oshvalin and lost her strength, allowing her to be killed by the Hollow Grand Fisher. How powerful is the Emperor of the Quincy? As you can imagine from the man who's the son of the Soul King and the progenitor of all Quincy, Yhwach is an extremely powerful being. He's the most powerful Quincy in existence and has a plethora of powers in his arsenal. The Quincy King is arguably one of the most broken villains, not just in Bleach, but in all of anime. It required the combined efforts of Aizen Sosuke and Ichigo Kurosaki, both of whom are transcendental beings in their own rights, to take Yhwach down. These are the powers and abilities of the one they call the Emperor of Quincy. What are his powers as the son of the Soul King? The vast majority of Yhwach's abilities come from the fact that he can distribute his soul to others, which returns to him, granting him additional benefits. Not to mention, his durability and endurance are of a superhuman level, being able to withstand the blows and attacks of some of the most powerful beings in Bleach. He's also a master swordsman and an expert hand-to-hand combatant, as seen by the fact that he goes toe-to-toe with several Shinigami whose primary weapon just so happens to be a sword. He also has immense spiritual prowess, far greater than even the most powerful Espadas and Shinigami. Yhwach is seen shattering the Ryatsu suppressing chair of Aizen, which he himself could not shatter despite his own insane spiritual pressure. Xyloporo informs us that Yhwach's Ryatsu is so potent that it was one of the factors responsible for keeping the gates of hell closed. He can make even powerful beings, such as his Stern Ritters, collapse on their knees under his spiritual pressure. Enhanced healing and restoration. Unlike the other Quincy, who need to absorb reishi from the environment and other creatures for their use, Yhwach's abilities allow him to distribute his soul and reishi to other creatures instead. Those who have a fragment of his soul within him get healed of all ailments, physical, mental, and spiritual. His soul fragment, however, is engraved with all the experiences and abilities of its recipient. When it returns to Yhwach, he is able to absorb all the experience, knowledge, and skills of that person. The person receiving his soul fragment also has his lifespan shortened heavily. He is also seen healing himself by forcing Reiatsu through his throat to restore his speech when Ichibei seals his voice, rendering him unable to speak. Ability to bestow powers. As an adult, Yhwach further enhanced his soul distribution technique. He did so by assigning letters to abilities and engraving them in his soul fragments, along with making the recipient drink his blood in a ritual. Those who went through this ritual were granted the power of the Shrift and were immensely powerful. This allowed him to distribute more of his soul and power to the recipients. The Shrift are the letters A to Z, and they're given to the 25 most powerful Quincy in the army, known as the Stern Ritters. Yhwach himself bears the Shrift A, which denotes the Almighty. Upon their demise, the power returns back to Yhwach, further enhancing this ability and adding it back into his arsenal. The power to dominate the will of his subjects. As all Quincy's contain his blood and fragments of his soul, they're heavily influenced by his ideals, one of which is their innate need to attack the Soul King even if they don't want to. He can influence their emotions using the sentiments ingrained in his blood and amplifying them with his Ryatsu. Just like a traditional head of the family, he has a measure of control over the actions of his children. This is the reason Ichigo ends up slashing through the Soul King against his will, even though he is only partly Quincy. Oshvalin, the power to redistribute his soul. This is probably the most important of Yhwach's powers. It's this ability that allows him to strip the powers and life force of any Quincy he wants and redistribute it to another he deems more worthy of it or to himself. Upon the activation of this technique, columns of light hit the targeted Quincies, after which they are subjected to the effect of this ability. Even if a Quincy is near the light, he's affected by it. It's fatal for the Quincy who are hit by this technique, with the weaker ones immediately losing their lives. However, the ones on the other end of the redistribution are rejuvenated and healed, with their powers being further amplified. Thanks to this ability, he doesn't have to wait for the natural deaths of the ones that have a piece of his soul and powers, as he can forcibly extract it at any point he wishes. It's also another reason no one would rise up against him or make a stake for the title of the Emperor of Quincy. Sanct Altar, also known as Usurpation Altar. Yhwach conjures 5 energy orbs above each of his fingers and shoots them in the air. The orbs then fire a beam toward the target, forming the shape of a Quincy Zeichen, which is a 5-pointed cross that can be seen throughout the Quincy culture, with the target in the middle. With this ability, Yhwach can rob the target of their abilities and grant it instead to Yhwach, regardless of the fact if they're Quincy or not. The Almighty, the true power of the royal bloodline. Although the base version of the Almighty is weaker than that of his fathers, he soon gains its full powers when he absorbs the Soul King. The Almighty grants him the gift of foresight, allowing him to see all possible futures as nothing remains hidden from him. It makes him an omniscient being for whom time is no longer linear, as he is not only able to see all possible futures like we mentioned a few seconds ago, but he is also able to view them simultaneously. The true power of the Almighty, however, is that it grants him the ability to alter the future that he sees. He does so by laying traps for his enemies, knowing fully where they're going to appear and preemptively striking them when they don't expect it. He's also able to avoid all traps and ambushes laid out for him, having already seen them ahead of time. Yhwach is able to see all the attacks that are being thrown at him, as well as where they'll happen. He can also outmaneuver his future attackers and come up with countermeasures in order to defend himself. This power makes him nigh invincible, as it leaves him with almost no chinks in his armor. Only the arms of the Soul King are exempt from this, as the Almighty cannot track their future. The Almighty also makes any ability that Yhwach is made aware of through its use ineffective against him, allowing him to instead wield it. Powers of assimilation and absorption of other beings. One of the most frightening abilities Yhwach has in his arsenal is his ability to consume and assimilate the essence of another being by simply touching it. With this, he can completely absorb the beings, along with all their abilities and powers. An example of this is when he absorbs the Soul King completely and takes his powers. We believe the rate of assimilation depends on the power level of the person being absorbed. He can absorb and assimilate people of lesser Reiatsu within a matter of seconds, while the stronger beings might take some time. This ability makes it so that there are virtually no upper limits to the power levels that Yhwach can achieve, as he can keep assimilating and absorbing beings in order to grow his strength, even if they're stronger than him. Soul King's energy manipulation. After absorbing the Soul King and Mimihagi, his right hand, Yhwach gains several new powers, one of which is to control a dark energy that envelops him, which he can use for both attack and defense. He can also use this energy to create barriers capable of engulfing areas as large as the entire Soul Society. He is also able to create tiny one-eyed creatures that emerge with the same dark energy. These things lack sentience and seem to be attracted to only the Reiatsu of the Shinigami, whom they rush to overwhelm and devour. We believe they're a manifestation of Yhwach's hatred for the Shinigami who betrayed the Soul King. Just how powerful are Yhwach's Quincy powers? The Master of Hirin-Kyaku. As the Quincy King, Yhwach has not only had access to all their powers, but can also use them at a level that's far beyond any of them. He's an expert Hirin-Kyaku user, which is a movement ability of the Quincy, similar to the Sonido and the Shunpo of the Hollows and the Shinigami. They ride the flow of Reishi under their feet to achieve this super fast movement. His mastery of this skill is so high that his movement is far greater than any that can be achieved normally by a Hirin-Kyaku, Sonido, or Shunpo. We see him keeping up with Ichigo's speed that has been enhanced by his Bankai Tensa Zangetsu effortlessly, something not many people can claim to have done. Complete control over Blute. Blute is an advanced technique used by some of the more powerful Quincies to reinforce their body for either offense or defense. They do so by pumping Reishi through their blood vessels. The offensive and defensive versions of the Blute cannot be used simultaneously. The defensive versions of the Blute Vein can be further enhanced to create a transparent force field that can easily protect the user from low to mid-tier attacks. This is called the Blute Vein Anhabin. This ability draws Reishi from the surrounding area to sustain itself, due to which everything is killed in its vicinity. Yhwach is seen tanking a Getsuga Tensho in Ichigo's Bankai form with his Blute Vein and minimal injuries. Though it is a technique that grants users some insane defensive upgrades, we think any Quincy other than Yhwach would have been totally obliterated by this move, especially considering Ichigo's power levels at that point in the story. This just goes to show Yhwach's proficiency when it comes to Blute. He can also control and regulate the strength of the Blute for all the Quincy that are capable of using this technique in his empire. Access to Quincy armaments and weapons. Yhwach has access to all the standard arms and weapons of the Quincy and can gather Reishi using his Quincy Cross to manifest his spirit weapons. He can use a Reishi sword of an unknown name, which looks highly ornate and resembles a Dedao with a bird-shaped crossguard. He also has his own Sankt Bogen, or the Saint's Bow, and just like everything else about him, his version is a super large bow with a Helig Veil, or sacred arrow, proportionate to its size. He also has the unique ability to form these sacred arrows without the need for a spirit weapon and can simply fire them off using his fingers. The arrows are powerful enough to take down someone as powerful as Yamamoto Genryosai. Yhwach can also increase the length and size of these arrows and is seen using one as a broadsword. With his already impressive laundry list of powers, he doesn't really require weapons, but what he does have is far superior to the ones his people can use. What are his other miscellaneous abilities? Besides these abilities, Yhwach can also open portals to various realms and can even choose which one of his subordinates he wishes to summon using this ability. He doesn't require any special stances or rituals to do so and can simply activate it by willing it. He is also seen being able to manipulate matter to an extent where he transforms his throne into a stairway with a mere thought. Yhwach is also an expert at using Quincy's spells, which are very similar to the Kido of the Shinigami. One of the most important powers he has, which really does set him above the rest of his kind, is his immunity to the hollows. The Reiatsu of the hollows is highly poisonous to the Quincy, but in the case of Yhwach, it is shown that he's unaffected when he absorbs Ichigo's Quincy and hollow powers during their battle. The Emperor of the Wandenreich is therefore head and shoulders above almost every creature to ever exist, past, present, or future, in the Bleach universe, save perhaps his father, the Soul King. Can Yhwach reproduce in the biological sense? Though Yhwach is called the father of all Quincy, he's not confirmed to have sired any biological progeny. This is not to say he is incapable of it. Given what we know of the existence of other Quincy families, we do understand his kind is able to reproduce. For Yhwach, we feel it would be more down to the women he chooses being powerful enough to give birth to his progeny infused with immense power. So yeah, we do think Yhwach can reproduce. Is Yhwach immortal? It's not clear whether Yhwach is immortal, as we do see him age throughout the course of his history. We know he was born as an infant and went through the normal process of growth. He was also a much younger man during his first clash with the Soul Society, and is older during the events of the 1000-year Blood War arc. We are therefore certain he does age, albeit extremely slowly by regular human standards. We don't know if he's truly immortal in the sense that aging won't kill him. What we do know is that he can succumb to mortal wounds. This is, however, extremely difficult, as the Almighty can easily change the future in which he loses his life. Does Yhwach even have weaknesses? Despite being an almost invincible being, there are a couple of chinks in Yhwach's armor that can be exploited by his enemies. Firstly, he needs to continuously transfer fragments of his soul to others and have them returned to him, or else he'll regress back to the state he was in as an infant, deprived of all his senses and completely helpless. Secondly, when he sleeps, his powers are transferred to his commander, Ugrim Hashwalt, and if Hashwalt were to die when he had his Emperor's powers, Yhwach would lose them forever. Also, if Hashwalt were to use the Almighty, his enemies would immediately be alerted to his vulnerable state. Lastly, in an almost poetic fashion, his weakness is the metal known as still silver that is formed within the hearts of his people that are struck by the light of the Ashvalan. Although it wouldn't outright kill him, it would render him weaker and unable to use his abilities for a short period of time. Marvelous verdict! If he hasn't already done so, we fully believe Yhwach will fully cement himself as an iconic villain by the end of the 1000-year Blood War arc. It's hard to write such an overpowered being, let alone a villain, while still making his motives something that the audience can understand and relate to. Oftentimes, what happens when such an overpowered villain is introduced is that their defeat is inconceivable, but when it does happen, it feels extremely contrived. It pushes writers into a corner, forcing them to come up with plot devices that seem very forced and work toward the detriment of the entire story. Tite Kubo's masterful rendition of Yhwach suffers none of these flaws. His motives are genuine and understandable, even if his methods are highly questionable. He seeks to create a world free from the fear of death and the suffering it causes. In his own contradictory and warped way, he also seeks to wreak vengeance upon the Shinigami, who, in his eyes, are responsible for the humiliation of his father and the imposition of this flawed state of the universe. His motivations are something the audience can empathize with. It's the very nature of the pursuit of these ambitions that takes away any sympathy they would feel toward him. Like every great villain ever written, Yhwach is the hero of his own story. We hope that with this video, we were able to shed some light on the anatomy of one of the most powerful villains and flawed individuals in all of anime. We are eagerly awaiting the continuation of the 1000-year Blood War arc. If you're still sitting on the fence, now's the perfect time to catch up to it. For more Bleach-related content, stay tuned to our channel as we cover all things Bleach-related here. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.